So in the beginning, God created Adam and Eve. Satan tempted them, and they fell out of the Garden of Eden in paradise, and they had 2 children, Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel, and many generations later, Noah was born. Noah and his wife, together with their sons, built an ark, and all of the people outside the ark perished in the great flood. Generations later, Abraham and Sarah were promised a son and given the covenant of God. They traveled to a new land and had a son, Isaac, who married Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah had 2 sons, twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob was the younger son, and he got the blessing from his father, Isaac. Jacob had 12 sons, who are shown here, and Joseph grew up to go to Pharaoh's court, and through various trials, he was sold by his brothers into Pharaoh's into slavery. And by interpreting some dreams, he eventually came to be second in command to Pharaoh. Here's Pharaoh here. And many generations went by, and Pharaoh forgot who Joseph was, and the Egyptians put the Israelites, which is Jacob's descendants, into slavery. So Moses was called to set the Israelites free, and he crossed the Red Sea and arrived at the temple, at the mountain, Mount Sinai, where God gave Moses and the nation of Israel the 10 Commandments. The Israelites were not allowed to enter the Promised Land, but they carried the 10 Commandments in this ark, the Ark of the Covenant. And whenever they encamped, they had to make a camp like this, and the Ark of the Covenant would be stored inside this area, the Holy of Holies. Eventually, they were able to cross over into the Promised Land with spies, of whom Joshua was one. And after Joshua died, it was the time of the judges. The judges were, here's Deborah, and Gideon, and Samson. These were the time of the judges. And during the time of the judges, Ruth and Boaz were part of the story. Ruth had children through Boaz, and she was the 9-time great-grandmother of King David. And during this time, Hannah had a baby. She was promised a baby that she would give to God so that he would be a prophet of God. And his name was Samuel. Samuel the prophet he appointed King Saul to be the king of Israel for a short time. But King Saul didn't obey all the commandments of God. And so King Saul was eventually overtaken by King David. King David took over King Saul's. David, when he was a young boy, defeated Goliath, the giant, and he had many victories over, military victories over Israel's enemies, and so he became the king of Israel. Then his son that he had with Bathsheba, Solomon, became the king, and Solomon made the temple. So he built this temple in 957 BC, and it was used for centuries. And there were many bad kings who followed him. One of them was King Ahaz. And Ahaz was, they were at the top of a mountain with Elijah. Elijah was telling King Ahaz to stop disobeying God's commandments. And they had a showdown. The prophets of Baal versus the prophet of God, and God won. So Elijah eventually was taken up to heaven in chariots of fire and was succeeded by Elisha, the next prophet of God. Elisha did various miraculous acts and signs, and you can read about the houses of prophets, and it continues with prophet Isaiah and prophet Jeremiah. And in the year 605, King Nebuchadnezzar came and he destroyed the temple, and you can read about it in Jeremiah 52. And the temple was destroyed, and the Israelites were taken out to be exiled. And then we can see the minor prophets. Daniel was in Babylon at this time, and he had lots of dreams and visions. And he had friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who refused to bow to a great statue, and so they were thrown into a fiery furnace, but they survived. And then Queen Esther lived around 460 BCE, and she was the queen to Xerxes, and she saved her people from death and during the Persian Empire. Not around the same time, you can read how Ezra and Nehemiah went back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls and the temple. And Jonah is also around this time when he is obviously swallowed by a great fish and told to go to Nineveh to tell people about God. So these are all the other prophets that are in the Old Testament. And during this time, before Jesus came, through the efforts of Ezra, Nehemiah, and people after them, the second temple is rebuilt. And many years pass by before Jesus is born.